I'm Kyle Dennis for Storm Team 3. Now we're talking about the biggest conference of weather nerds across the entire world, the AMS conference that took place in January. I had a chance to go up there to Boston for this year's conference. It's in a different city each year. This year it was in Boston. We had actually a bunch of people asking us, what's a bunch of meteorologists going to Boston in January? Because typically it would be cold and snowy, but when we got there, it was in the 70s. Record highs. We saw two back-to-back days of 70s when we were there. It's been a very warm winter. It's the first time that's ever happened in Boston. So let's give you a quick overview of the meeting and what we were doing up there. Why do we all meet every year in January? Well, it's kind of the only time of the year where we all can get together and meet under one roof and discuss all of the latest going on in the field of weather and climate. This is what the exhibit hall looked like, and companies that produce weather instruments, weather software, just about all of them were there. You see NASA's exhibit there on the left, and a quick walk through this exhibit hall just give you a very quick overview of the very latest going on in the field, all of the latest research, technology. It was really just very educational to see all the things going on. We also had a lot of lectures, a lot of presentations about some of the big weather events of 2018, what went well with the forecast, what could have gone better, and this gives us all a way of kind of reassessing things and figuring out what we can do better going forward for the next big event. There were a lot of talks on climate change, which, as you can imagine, brought a lot of not such great news, but there was also some good news, like this particular chart that shows the average number of yearly lightning fatalities from the early 70s to 2019. And look how you can see that very clear and very sharp downward trend, which means there's a lot more awareness of these storms. People are knowing about these dangers and getting themselves to safety much more quickly, and so there are far fewer fatalities. And of course, it's our job to communicate those threats. So that tells us that while there are, of course, always ways to improve forecasting, it actually has come a long way. Here's a look at one of the lunch groups we had, and these two guys here, where you see where it says Hurricane Hunters, those two guys, Jeremy DeHart and Ryan Rickard, sat down at our table. This was actually not a planned meeting. They just kind of wandered over, but this was one of the highlights of the entire conference because we hear about the hurricane hunters all the time, we get their reports all the time, but we don't often get an inside look at their job. And they gave us a really interesting account of Hurricane Matthew. We actually asked them what was the one time, if there was a time, where they actually felt afraid going to these storms, because these guys have to do this all the time. It's their job, and so a lot of times they're not really frightened by it. But the one that did kind of send a shiver down their spine was Hurricane Matthew. And the reason for that is the hurricane hunters, when they fly into these storms, they have coordinates for the very center of the storm because that's where the wind is calm. That's where it's actually safe to fly. So they're kind of mapping out the safest path directly to that center. But Matthew did something that hurricanes do every once in a while, but it's more of a rare track where they slow down or stall and then do a loop-de-loop. Matthew did that before it reached our latitude. So as they were going in toward the center of the storm, Matthew, the hurricane itself, was actually in the process of making that loop, and instead of getting into the center of the storm, they ended up in the most dangerous part of the storm, the eye wall, where the maximum sustained winds are located. So instead of having calm wind that they expected, all of a sudden, they had a 200-knot tailwind that they had to get out of as quickly as they could. But the most dangerous thing to do is to take the fastest path out of that directly into the center. So they had to think quickly to get themselves out of that situation. And so it was certainly very nerve-wracking for them. But what they ultimately did, which was brilliant, was to spiral around the center of the storm and slowly work their way into the middle. That was the fastest way they could get out of harm's way without having to be stuck in a situation where they're just in those 200-knot winds or going directly into the center of the storm, which, you know, when you're thinking quickly, you might want to do. They had to think very quickly to come up with a better solution. And actually, with that particular update from the hurricane hunters on Matthew, there was a delay. And I remember this, forecasting the storm and watching the storm as it was unfolding. There was one report with some of the latest info we were expecting that was delayed. It came in 20, 30 minutes or so late, maybe longer, and that was the reason. So we got an inside look as to sometimes why we get those delays in data. So just kind of an interesting story there, and actually, quick funny story actually, with the hurricane hunters, they told us that they're more nervous going on commercial flights than their actual missions into the hurricanes because they don't have control. Then when they get into a situation where there's turbulence, they don't know what's going on. They don't have all of that inside information, and they don't have any control of the flight. So just kind of interesting to hear that they're more scared going on commercial flights than the hurricane mission. So here's just me with some of my meteorologist friends, Tim Heller, Josh Marthers, Katie Morgan. We spent a lot of time together talking about weather in our markets. Tim's from Houston, Josh in Charleston, Katie in Nashville. So kind of a big perspective there, a wide array of different types of weather. We got to discuss what happened in our markets and our cities the last couple of years, give each other some ideas and feedback. So it was a very interesting conference. Like I said, there was a lot more in terms of climate change talks, in terms of some of the latest weather software, and all I can say right now, that's the quick overview. You'll be seeing a lot more detail in future updates. I'm Kyle Dennis for Storm Team 3 Now.